Ooh, we ready?
We're
Yeah.
we're going live. Yeah, I just hit live.
Yay! We are
So
live. We're going to talk about cosplay live.
about using molds to the max.
To the
So
max.
yeah. Um. So
Victoria
yeah,
made us.
that's our discussion today. Um. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and have introductions. So we'll start with you, Amber.
Hello, everybody. My name is Amber Bright. I am a professional prop maker here in Phoenix. I've been cosplaying for one more year than whatever she says. So whatever she says, add 1 year, and that's how long I've been doing it. And my full-time job is actually making things using molds and other processes to sell online. So including these horns, which may or may not stay because I have the wrong glue on today. So we'll see. We'll see. It'll be fun. So, hi.
Jinx.
Hi. Hi, I'm Jinx Cosplay. I've been cosplaying for 23 years. And I have done a lot of video game cosplay. My expertise here is sewing, but I have been doing a lot of resin. So I know more about like the resin mold use and stuff like that. So that's kind of where I'm going to come in. Although I did help Amber during COVID, like do a little bit of her business. I learned how to slush cast. So
Yeah, you
we're going to talk a
did.
lot
It
about
was
that.
a lot of help.
I did, yeah. I wish you a little helper there. All right, thanks, guys.
And I'm Thermo, and I've made molds, but primarily, I mean, I've done like life casting for facial mold making, and which is soft mold making through rubber, and I've done hard casting for so I could cast in silicone, and I've done the same thing with like resins, quick sets, and clear sets, and UV set, all kinds of things. So I've got a lot of molds and materials. um, so I just wanted to kind of start with like some of the basics. The thing that you see the most frequently people using molds for, or either making a mold or using a mold, it's typically going to be some kind of like jewelry or right. It's usually jewelry or gems. So it's like a little. It's either like a hard case gem like this or a flexible soft one. Yeah. So like a soft one like that. I also have like some people will use these types of gems. So this is flexible and this is hard. I guess the big difference that you should be aware of. So typically, because these hard molds have like a release kind of built into them, you're okay. But if they don't, in general, you'll want to spray a pre-release if you're going to be casting something hard, like a hard cast resin. Yeah, so you can use mold release like that. I've also just when I was out of stuff, used a little bit of Vaseline, just
Actually,
non-scented, like plain.
when I build molds and I need to do two parts that don't adhere to
Mhm.
each other, I use Vaseline as my
Vaseline,
blocker.
yeah,
Vaseline
yeah.
is absolutely in that mold maker toolkit of very important and very useful.
Yeah, and it's incredibly useful too, but just be aware that if you're going to be casting a hard setting liquid into a hard mold, you have to have a release. So you need to have some kind of release rated for it. I also recommend whatever you're checking. The UV molds do not do well with releases, which is why I recommend Vaseline. The Vaseline can handle the heat of the UV set because of the way that the chemical reaction occurs so quickly. Sometimes, like the spray that Amber showed, it does not react well with UV set ones, at least in my experience. But you pretty much any other hard setting resin typically is fine.
So what Sam's talking about a little bit is when you get resins, which is the plastic that you'll use to create this, and when you get silicone, it'll come in two parts. And you mix those parts together at whatever ratio is for that release. And then it'll go through a reaction, an exothermic reaction. It's very important to remember that it gets hot. So like you don't want to do it in like a styrofoam cup. It will melt and smolder. It'll go through that process. Sometimes you'll hear it called the flash. We'll be like, oh, it flashed really quick, and that just means that it went from soft or liquid to solid in a flash. And there's different types of resins and different ways that they set. So some set through that exothermic reaction. Some, like Sam was recommending, need UV light. So they need to be like literally like baked under a UV light to have them fully set. Usually the things that need UV setting are the clear resins, because clear resins don't usually have that exothermic reaction. So depending on what resin you're using is going to depend on how it sets and what you need to do to set it. Like if you don't set a UV based resin, it'll still like get hard-ish. It'll just like remain kind of floppy and pliable, and you'll
Yeah.
damage it with your fingers.
Well,
So
and some of them that they don't actually fully set because, especially the jewelry ones, they will stay liquidy for most. Like you'll always end up with this top layer of liquid. Like some of
yeah,
it will set, but then you end up with this top layer of liquid, and it's
blended.
actually toxic when absorbed into your skin. It can make you very, very sick. I know people that did not understand why they were having issues with reactions to their hands, and it was because they were touching these kind of resins without gloves. So I recommend too getting gloves. I don't use latex gloves. I use like the latex-free nitrile gloves, so like medical gloves, or the gloves that you can get from an automotive shop that can handle the heat if the resin starts splashing fast.
If you have a Hobby Lobby, or not a Hobby Lobby, geez, no, don't go to Hobby Lobby. If you have a Harbor Freight near you, you can get boxes of reusable glove or one-time use gloves for pretty cheap. So that's where I usually get mine is Harbor Freight. Speaking of PPE, almost everything that we talk about in this episode is going to be toxic, either inhaled or on your skin. I recommend at minimum, no matter what you're doing, no matter what resin you're using, no matter what you are casting, at minimum, gloves and some sort of mask. You don't need to do a full respirator, but a lot of like if we talk about plaster kicks off fumes or kicks off dust into the air. Resin, it is toxic to inhale the fumes. So at minimum, get a high quality mask like an N95 or something like that. We should have them all. We've all had them. had need for them. I invested in a cool flow respirator. So, and of course I forgot to grab it, but it's a nice big respirator. And it's a cool flow, meaning that when you inhale, it brings in cool air and then it exhales the hot air so it stays comfortable. Sometimes you'll need eye protection. And then sometimes you might want like clothing protection, like a bib. But at minimum, gloves. And then I do highly recommend some sort of respirator or mask, especially if you're doing a lot of this. Like I do it every day. So I have the respirator because I want my lungs to still function in like 5 to 10 years when I'm done with this. So PPE is just good. No matter if you're building molds or if like Jinx was saying, like if you're just casting. Oh, and do it in a well-ventilated room. Don't do it in like a little like you'll see this room is kind of small. I don't make molds in this room. I make molds outside on my back porch because it's
Yeah, well ventilated spaces or spaces that have like airflow with fans or uh, word of warning, if you are going to have it go in the backyard, make sure it doesn't have direct sunlight. Direct sunlight will actually affect its curing time and can make it bubble more. And you really don't want them to bubble too much. Bubbling really sucks. I have some.
Now we have this problem in Arizona because we have sunshine like 95%.
Well, that's right. They're not going to have this problem like in upstate New York or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, you can see like these were next to a window, so you can see that they have a little bit more bubbling. But I also learned that if you just start tapping it intermittently during the curing process, that tends to go away. So these ones didn't have as many bubbles, and these ones were almost bubbleless because I learned to start tapping it during the curing process.
It's also in the way you mix it too with your resins. If you pour side A and side B, and then you kind of fold it instead of mixing it, just kind of fold it.
Yeah, and so I actually brought my
bubbles will go up to the top.
So yeah, you can show like don't just like right. You want to kind of just like scoop it around and like fold in the cheese.
Yeah. Fold in the cheese. Fold the cheese.
Yeah, the only reason that I was mixing really bits. Like this is my water cup, but I had 2 cups this size where I was mixing half, like
Your
the
water
whole
cup,
thing.
like that's what you're drinking out of?
This is not what I mixed it just looked like this.
Okay, you are drinking out of it.
That's my Pem cup.
Yeah. Oh, from Disneyland, right?
Yeah, but the mixing cup looked like this, right? So that I could pour it. I always like having something with a tip because it makes it easier to pour and it controls it more, especially when you're pouring like smaller gems or smaller things that like you need to really get the details in there.
And when you're pouring the gems, if you hold your mold kind of at an angle and pour into one corner so it slides down, a lot of times you'll get less bubbles that way. Instead of just like jump right in the middle, pour kind of to the edge and then straighten it up so that it, levels out. Hi, Matthew.
They also have tools for if you're worrying about bubbling for molds like that are flat and open and there's nothing sealing them. They also have these little shakers that every hour you just put it on it near a window and it just occasionally goes and rattles it. So it rattles all the oxygen out. Because it does off gas. I mean, that's what's happening is it's off gassing while it's curing, and so those gases sometimes get caught in those bubbles, which is why you need something to occasionally just like jiggle it.
Now, there are a lot of different tools too, like that you can use when you want to do a little bit more accurate work. So you can get like smaller cups and also this is great because I like to use a lot of different colors. So you can always mix your resin, pour them into smaller separate cups, and then you can mix in your pigments, etc. And some of them do come with little points.
I go through so many cups that I just buy the little like condiment cups.
Because I won't tell you what these are from, but they came out of a kit that I no longer use. There's also these little eyedroppers. So you can get these in bulk. And these are perfect for like little tiny, tiny details, or if you want to make swirls and colors.
Yeah, now, I have the colors for resin, and these are specifically made for resin dyes. Just be careful if you're using fabric dye or other things. There's additional water in there, and resin and water don't always get along. So I recommend getting a resin. This was only $19, and it actually has a built-in dropper, so you can control it a lot better.
Yeah, the other things you can use are alcohol inks. So alcohol colored inks are really good to use.
With some resins.
Also, finally,
cured resins, you can do that.
Yeah, but you can't with some of the other standard ones. But the easiest way to do it, like to avoid all this cost and to just go with resins, is do a clear resin and then paint the back of it with nail polish or adhere some stick-on vinyl to it, and suddenly you have an entire color.
I used to make gems really just clear with a backing of nail polish and a little bit of aluminum foil, and those are so bright and sparkly, so pretty.
I've got some.
Yeah, those are the quickest and easy ways to do it. Anthony says, "Hello, ladies. Love your costumes. Amber Bright and Jinx Thermo must have shaved her hair off." Yes, she did.
So that is just nail polish on the back of it. So the glue fell off something because I actually technically took it off. I'm rebuilding it, but I was able. That's a great thing too, is I'm able to salvage these because they last so long. But I mean, look at that from all angles. It's all these really pretty colors, and it's just nail polish.
I actually a lot of time like that better than when people dye the whole gem, because I feel like that has more depth and kind of like sparkle than when people use like an ink that makes the gem then.
I mean, there's a difference, right? So here's nail polish, and then this is just it does have a bit more depth to it.
Yeah. So Anthony, I am not dressed up as anything. I am dressed up as like a devil lady.
And I did shave my head because I'm doing Cassandra Nova from the Deadpool and Wolverine movie. And I'm also doing Dr. Robotnik. And I'm also doing Drax the Destroyer. And I'm also doing Safina all in one weekend. And I was like, I'm just going bald.
Forget doing multiple days of bald caps. Like hair will grow back. Like
that's a good point. You can also use mica powders. Which are commonly used in like candles and soaps, and those are really good to use. They're just messy, right? Like they're nice though because you can mix in a lot of different colors. You can with any of these colors you can change the opaqueness depending on with mica powders you can change the opaqueness, adding more or less. With things like the dyes, like the ink and the resin dyes, those are almost always transparent. I think. Right.
Yeah, you can. Well, the dyes that I have for the resin, there's actually one that has a white opaque dye that you can mix in a little bit, and a black opaque dye, depending on how dark or light you want the transparent ones to be in. So you can make it. Oh, yeah. Very,
These are
very
my
colorful.
resin tints.
Yeah. And then you can also add in glitters of any thickness, but also remember that if you do have like heavy glitters, they do settle. So that's why.
So for those, I
Glitter will
recommend
settle.
casting. I recommend casting half of it, letting it cure, and then mixing again and casting more, so you actually have layers of glitter.
Now that's better to use with a UV resin. It gets
Yes.
harder with the two-part resins because obviously it takes a lot of work to mix, and then of course they take time to cure. So a lot of times if you're dealing with heavy glitters or other kind of things that you want to control, you're going to want to use the UV resin. So Matthew says, I have Jinx dice and a thermo gem. So I actually tried my hand at making dice. I never will again because I don't have, you really need an air pressure thing for it.
Yeah.
But I did do this technique in which I used the resin, the UV resin, an airdropper, airdropper, not an airdropper. Gosh, what do you call these? I don't know. A little dropper thing. And I did and when you use UV resin, we'll talk a little bit about UV resin because it's only a short amount of time that we need to. You have to do them in very small layers. And when I say small layers, I'm talking like millimeters, especially if it's more opaque. The more opaque it is, the harder it will be to cure. So usually you go in very small, like 2 to 3 millimeter layers at max. Take time to cure that in between. You don't want to use UV resin for bigger projects, like anything. I mean, even like these kind of like molds, this is probably, and you'd probably want a clearer mold, but nothing probably thicker than this unless you're really, really patient. So with the dies, I was using, I would put in like a layer of resin, and then I would stick in maybe some really thick glitter pieces, and then another layer, and let that set, and let that set, and let that set. We're lucky here in Arizona because we can just put it at the window, and that helps cure it. But definitely, like I said, the more opaque it is, the more difficult it will be to cure.
Yeah.
So.
And I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about molds too, because most of what we've shown you have been ones that are open like this that you just pour into. There are also other molds where like it is still open and it's a one part, but they're a little bit trickier to pour into, which is why again you kind of want to have those something with like a tip that's more controlled, so you can keep, and when you're pouring you go in circles, right? You keep going in circles and circles, and you keep tapping and pouring, and yeah. But there's also some of these molds like this where they're kind of a hybrid between a closed mold and an open mold, where you pour a little bit in the bottom first to get it settled, and then you seal this over the top of it. And once it's sealed, there's a little hole that you would pour the rest into until it's full. And that's how like I make eggs. So.
And molds like that are going to need a lot of like post like finishing. You might need to sand off edges that are that got caught in between the seams or at the top. And
yeah,
so
that's why pouring very carefully and never going to the top is important until it's sealed.
Absolutely. So
also,
this type of mold is called a block mold because it's just kind of a block. So even these are considered block molds, even though they're not block shaped, they're considered block molds.
Yeah.
The one that Sam had is, like she said, a hybrid mold between a block mold and a matrix mold.
Yep.
Matrix mold is basically a mold that has an out. I don't have any that I can show you because the one that I have is way.
I have a matrix. I can show it. Yeah.
Okay.
I can show it.
I
have a picture.
Outer shell that has an inner piece that sits in and basically like clears the space inside. So yeah, so it's basically like a sandwich or like a shell and a plug, and it squeezes out any extra material so that you get a mold that, or a cast that is, detailed to a specific shape. It's more 3D.
Yeah.
Like this is going to get you a cast that is beautiful, but it's flat on one side, which is, it's good for like if you want horns to stick to your head or anything like that. If you need something that is like Sam was showing for her thing, she needs it this way as well as this way as well as this way. That's when you start getting into matrix molds.
Yeah, and that's right here where I've got like the clamps on it, and
and those become a hodgepodge of pieces. So Sam, how many pieces was your matrix mold?
So I managed to, after testing, only get it down into 2 pieces, and then I had to learn to rotocast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. A lot of
comments here
rotocast in layers
are like, I want to read the comments before we get too far. Oh gosh, Anthony, still love that video you and Amber Bright did with Jinx. I know that I still get notifications for that. 30 more episodes away from the 200th episode. Wait, what are we? Oh, 170. I mean, we've done more than 200, I'm sure, but like as far as our scheduled episodes, for sure. So we'll need to do something cool. Are any of you girls thinking about cosplaying Juno from Overwatch 2? Not sure yet. I have my cosplay plans on hold. And it's cute dog Jinx. This is Coconut. Coco. Okay.
My dog's recovering from surgery, so he is exiled so that he doesn't.
Cool.
But yeah, once you start getting into like the block molds are so easy. Like, and I want to encourage people, like, please don't feel like you can't, like, this is like there's too much of a hurdle here, because you could make a simple block mold out of plaster for like $5, and you don't need any specific special material. You just need non-drying clay, so an oil-based clay, and then you make whatever you want, and then you create like a little like box around it, fill it with the plaster, and then you'll have your mold.
And you can also do this putty, which is just like, it's great because you don't have to worry about building the box if you're not sure how to architect that, because you just put it around the object and let it dry.
Yeah. So the putty is really useful
like
for
that you can get it. Yeah, little kits like this that you can get at the craft store for beginners. So really easy to start.
Putty's really useful for kind of more basic shapes. I wouldn't use it for anything that has fine detail, because you have to be like really careful to get the putty in all of the like crevices. For something with a lot of fine detail, I would recommend liquid. But a great resource, and I'm going to pimp them out a little bit, is Reynolds Advanced Materials. We here in Phoenix are lucky to have an amazing one. There's like one in Seattle that I know is fantastic. There's a couple in California, I think, a couple on the East Coast. But if no matter where you are, look up Reynolds Advanced Materials. And if you have one nearby, they usually have classes. So you can actually go and take a mold making class, and they'll walk you through all of the stuff that we're talking about specifically for your specific project. Because like when I say there's a lot of options and a lot of ways to do things, like I'm not going to move my camera, but I literally have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shelves over here filled with different types of casting materials. Like,
yeah. And if you're not comfortable making your own mold, like we said, you can buy it. But I also recommend quickly checking the baking area at craft stores, because I'll show this, my very first project into doing molds and stuff. I used a flouring cup. So they use these little cups to build flowers, and then they peel them off and then put them on cakes. So this, I used the top part of it to create a gem, and then I cast on the inside with mold release, and it created the actual gem setting. So I did this for my sister's Raven from Teen Titans, and it ended up working really. So this is the mold that we were showing you. Like there's the resin and then the result of that, and then for the gem setting, I just used these flowering cups. I mixed a quick set resin, and that's what it came out. It came out like this. And it ended up working really well, where I got to leave like a little bit of a hole in the back so that I could still glue all of the gems to it. There's a lot of process of, hey, look at this, all this mixing and all this fun stuff, and here we go. And what I ended up doing was I actually set the belt into the gem setting while it was curing. So I pour the resin, and then I put the belt in there, and that way it became a permanent fixture inside. So I didn't have to worry about it potentially breaking off, because after testing it, I realized it was a breaking point. And by having it sit in there, it ended up working so much better.
There's a lot you can do once you understand the material that you're using. Like Sam was saying that she used a part in the setting to, change her material essentially. I have a couple of molds where I cast the resin flat, and during its curing period, I actually take it out and bend it onto a mannequin. And then once it fully cures, it'll be in that shape.
Make sure you wear gloves. Yeah.
Always wear gloves. Absolutely. But like there's depending on your resin, if you get a slower setting resin, you have about like 5 minutes. A lot of the resins I use, I have like 30 seconds. I'm like, okay. Boom, boom. but there's ways to kind of manipulate your materials as they're setting. Most materials, you don't manipulate silicone. Like, don't touch silicone. If you are casting in silicone, leave it alone until it is completely done. There's nothing in there.
If you touch it, it just starts sticking up, and then you have this weird little bump inside, and you're like,
yeah. So resin you can manipulate while it is curing. Silicone, leave it alone. If you look at it cross-eyed, it's going to decide to fuck up. Like, you know.
Yeah, that's probably why it was like $150 just to make that mask, because it took me so long to get used to using platinum pure silicone.
And this is the other thing too. When people go, oh, I want to make my own leku, I want to make my own mask, et cetera, et cetera. I know I just said it's not expensive to get into, but it can be extremely expensive once you start getting into silicone, once you get into
start small. Don't start with a whole mask like I did. Start small.
Yeah. And understand that, like, in some regards, if that product already exists, it might be cheaper and easier for you to just buy it. Like, you can cast your own horns. But like, if you don't want to spend the $60 on mold silicone, the $40 on oil-based clay, on the mold release and stuff like that.
And the specialty paints too, because even with silicone pigments, you still don't get all the unique colors. You still have to usually paint on afterwards.
So the links that I threw in the chat is Reynolds Materials. So Reynolds Materials, they have a lot of great products on there. They do have a beginner's silicone mold making kit. And I did throw a link to a more affordable kit from Let's Resin on Amazon. However, you know, really like look at the options and look at the different things that you need to get started and, you know, make your choice from there. A lot of people do also 3D print their own stuff. So I know a lot of stores, a lot of independent artists will create their own, you know, patterns and print their own stuff and then create molds from that. So that's where you see a lot of people that do sell, like, you know, or you can do it by hand with clay. So either way is a great way to start.
You also, if you want to go the cheap route and you don't have something with a lot of detail, you can use foam clay too. Or if you do have something with a lot of detail, you can still use foam clay, but your clay has to be very hard and you have to wet it and constantly press it into the indentations to make sure you get all those details.
So this is one that you sculpted, right?
Yep. So this is when I'm actually mid sculpt. You'll see there's no detailing right there. So this is going to become a 2-part sleeve mold. So once I'm done with this, I will do a layer of silicone and then create a shell, and it'll come out looking like this. So this is a slush cast sleeve mold. So I've got the inner shell of silicone. That's where like the horn detailing is, but silicone is squishy. So then we have a shell that goes on the outside so that when I'm casting it.
And that's a good thing to talk about. If you're casting something that is hard, you should have a squishy inner mold and then a hard outer mold to support it. I only had the hard outer mold because I was casting in silicone, which is different. You typically only want a hard mold for silicone, as silicone tends to delaminate when you cast it in rubber. So you usually want to cast it in some kind of a hard resin. So just be mindful of the material that you're casting in. But I figured I'd show the sculpt that I did too.
This is the mold I use for latex and foam. It is epoxamite. So it's firm. Because I can
and
get
then the clay about, like, are you using the wax-based monster clay or are you using Sculpey or something else?
I am actually using the wax-based clay. The kind that I've used for like this kind is actually artist's modeling clay that I got off of Amazon for really cheap. And it's fine, but it's really soft, especially here in Arizona. It gets warm really fast. I've just started using alien clay, which is from Reynolds. And it comes in different hardnesses. And I love it.
Yeah, I love monster clay, but you have to put it in a microwave or you have to heat it up with a heat gun. But the great thing about monster clay is once you've done, if you already have like a couple molds, you can just remelt it and reuse it over and over and over and over. Same thing with like the alien clay and
I actually have my
so the thing about
clay cleaning kit.
The thing about silicone is that silicone doesn't last forever, right? So wow, that is definitely not for food
You always have something dedicated to it. Like my monster clay can be microwaved like it's microwave safe, but you have to be careful how long you microwave it, or it'll go. Yeah.
It's not
So,
chocolate, it's clay.
no, it's clay.
Basically melt it, and then I strain it to get all the hair
Yep,
and
it looks
mold
like
it
old refried
out,
beans.
right?
Like yes.
Who's hungry?
So just to, just an FYI, because I know that Amber, you sometimes have to remake molds. So silicone does have a shelf life and a use life. So just be aware of that as well. Like for me, like a casual resin caster, I can use these molds for quite some time. But I know, how many uses do you usually get out of yours, Amber, before you have to remake one?
So that is a fantastic question, because like you said, silicone does have a shelf life. Silicone is degraded by two things. It is degraded by heat, and it is degraded by being stretched, tension. So if you build, like for example, a block mold like this, if I use a resin that is quick setting, so it gets really hot, and then I'm constantly like going like this, I'll get about 30 uses out of it. If I use a slower setting resin and was to turn this into like a 2-part mold, so then I would just like pull it apart and like not stretch it so much, you could probably get like 60 to 70 uses out of it. So it depends a lot on how you're taking care of the silicone and what you're using, and what your mold looks like too. A lot of times block molds are the simplest, but they're not the longest lasting. A lot of the molds I use now for production are actually 2-part molds, even though they're still technically block molds, so that I can just peel them apart and I'm not like twisting to pop it out.
Well,
And not
and you
make a lot
also can condition your molds. Like there is mold like silicone conditioners you can use to help them try and extend the life of it. They're not like they're good for ones that you're not hyper stretching or anything, or if you've made a mask and you want your mask to last a really long time, you can keep conditioning it so that every time you peel it off, it's not stretching it too much. But in general, yeah, if you're using resin, like I said, if you said it off gases and generates heat. So if you're using it to cast resin, you have, I mean, I've had a silicone mold for 8 years now, but I don't cast gems that frequently. And I also cast with the 36-hour clear cast.
Yep.
So it doesn't really produce much heat.
Yeah. Whereas
So
if I use the 5-minute resin in this, it gets really hot. Like it gets.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when we mentioned, so real quick, PSA, when we mentioned you could take the mold out and like the resin out and manipulate it, I recommended the automotive gloves because they have that nitrile, because it gets so hot that it will burn through a normal rubber glove.
It's so often that you're gonna manipulate it. So, but in the event that you do, like I've never had to really manipulate. I mean, again, I just make stuff for cosplay and other things, but I've seen people make like bowls and they make these different curves. And so in those cases, do be aware that they do get hot. I have had instances where I've mixed resin like incorrectly and it got really hot and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm calling this off and throwing it away. But I want to talk a little bit about some purchase molds as well, because you don't need to just go for like, oh, what's a mold for resin? But molds can be used with both resin, with clay, with foam clay, but these are really cool ones. These are no longer for sale, I don't think, but you can still find them. These are Evil Ted. So if you guys remember Evil Ted, he's like been like one of the longest running one of the longest running like prop guys. Yeah. So these are really cool because
I've gotten to meet him a couple of times. He's genuinely just awesome.
And this is a little bit more durable, but it is floppy, so you'd always have to have it on a flat. I use trays, so use it on a flat surface unless you want to curve it. These you can curve, mid cure. So he had like bolts and like gears. I love to use this one for like jewelry and other kinds of like. I've used this to make like necklaces. I use it for a choker. Where I did curve it. So I did curve it like mid cure so that it could fit around my neck. And then he's got another one here that's like, it's like this. These are really simple ones that you can push foam clay into as well. These are more like craft molds, like Thermo showed these before. Like you can make chains, bows, and all sorts of things. And like she mentioned, baking molds. I actually could not find the right, so I made actually both of these molds I used to make one of the Dimitrescu daughters. I used this for the necklace, and then this I used for flowers to put here on their like flower brooches. So these are just baking molds. They're not as flexible. But I just used like a 1/2 inch thickness of it. So lots of great options that you can just purchase. Lots of gem molds out there too. So just wanted to talk about those a little bit. When people
And
when people start making their
there is ways to commission molds too. Like if you want to be able to be casting something specific, but you need a mold for it, there you can find people to build the mold for you and send it to you. The price of that is going to really differ based on like what you want or what you need. But there are
Yeah.
people
I found these on
like
Etsy.
I have made horn molds for other people, just simple block molds to send to them. So it's an option.
So definitely, and do you guys have foam clay on hand? I mean, I do. I have foam clay. So mine's kind of drying out a little bit, but I can reach in here and grab. Because I haven't used it in a long time. But let's find some soft foam clay here. Ha! Here we go.
I have a bunch.
Foam clay's a lot of fun. I love foam clay.
I've also, just real quick, I've made molds out of the polyplastics too.
Yeah,
Those work as well.
You can make both molds and cast using the polyplastic, but the polyplastic, when it's malleable, is super freaking hot. So you better be using your proper PPE when you're doing it.
Yeah, I use a mechanics glove. I'm always shocked when I see people molding it and putting it right on those teeth because they're so hot when you do that. So I recommend they sell just teeth molds at like random places. You can even find them on Amazon where it's just a fake jaw, and mold it, like sculpt it on that. Don't sculpt it in your mouth.
I always see those how to make your own teeth, and it's like, okay, just take the poly and put it directly on your teeth. And I'm always like, ooh, that's how
you burn your lip. Yeah.
That's how you have to go to the dentist. And
and it can strip off your enamel too. So be careful. Yeah.
There's some cosplay tutorials out there that I'm like, ooh, I really wish you wouldn't like recommend this because this is going to go wrong for somebody and really hurt them.
So we would usually wait for this to cure, and it's air dry cure, right? So it cures really fast here in Arizona. Whoop, we lost Amber. Oh, there she is. She's back.
My laptop fell forward. I have it propped up against my clay. It's not in an actual holder. So
yeah, so foam clay is air dry, and it is still a little bit malleable. Shortly in its shortly after before it dries, you can wet it a little bit to resculpt some parts. But for the most part, I find it to be my favorite is Cosplay Pros.
It takes 12 hours to dry for me. I don't know if I'm just cursed, but it always takes like 12 hours or more to dry for me.
Well, it depends, right? Because when I made my Bowser horns, they were so thick at the bottom that it took a lot longer to cure, right? So it definitely depends. But I pushed that into that Evil Ted mold. Like, how cool is that? Like, that's pretty quick and easy for beginners. And I feel like the foam clay that I used, some of them are not as good. This is some cheap Amazon one that I used for filler. But they sometimes harden, I think, harder than just regular foam, which is nice. But they're still kind of malleable. That's why I wanted to make my Bowser, horns? Spikes,
yeah. I do recommend trimming them instead of sanding. I found that foam clay doesn't sand quite as well as normal foam.
Yeah. So because it has a little bit more like moisture in overall, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. But I used foam clay for those because I knew that they were going to be on the back of me, and they were either going to get knocked off or bumped into things. So I didn't want anything that would like break and snap off. Like it would just pop off, and then I can just fix it up or make a new one. I've also made out of them too.
Yeah, like you could have done those out of latex or silicone to get the same like flexibility, but like then you would have increased the cost exponentially. Whereas like the foam clay flowers, work just as well.
Well, and Ray mentions shrinkage. So shrinkage is a thing you have to be concerned about. But this is the thing. I made foam clay I did a Magic Night Ray Earth, and I think it was Fuho Oji inspired by Sunset Dragon. And the shrinkage ended up being very beneficial because it hugged the fake boobs I was wearing even tighter and pushed them in more. And I was like, oh look, it worked. I mean, there you go. So that was actually like, I am not that busty and she's not that busty. And I think it's the funniest thing that like Sunset Dragon drew her as very busty, but I had to make the mannequin. I had to put the breasts and everything on there because I am not that busty. You could see I did an outline of the foam clay to figure out where I was going to attach it because I had like buttons and snaps on it later. But this is all foam clay. Those wings are foam clay.
Well, this was the cheaper foam that I used because, like I said, I used cheaper foam for filler, like for the spikes. They actually like expanded the bottom, which was really weird. But then again, that was just the cheapy version. I would use more high quality foam clay for more details. So maybe that was just because it was cheapy.
And a
But
lot of it too is going to depend on the environment that you are drying it in. Here
yeah,
in Arizona, we do tend to get more shrinkage because there's no humidity. If you keep it in an area with like higher humidity, theoretically it'll take longer to cure, but we'll see less shrinkage. So latex is the other thing. Clay, like foam clay, and latex are the two things that you're going to get shrinkage on. If you're casting using resin or silicone, you're not going to really like have to deal with shrinkage. So
yeah. And again, like I would wait to cure this. Like this
Mhm.
would be a lot more durable. But just
Mhm.
look how easy and quick that is. So definitely a
Mhm.
great way for beginners to work with
Yeah.
molds, foam clay.
Even advanced, in my opinion, it saves you time. If you're
Mhm.
already doing a really advanced concept and you're exhausted, you're still putting all the work in. You're still having to apply it. You're still having to trim it once it cures. You're still having to paint it and seal it and attach it to things. It still requires work. You're just using a tool, right? Like a Dremel's a tool, right? A mold is a tool that you're using to expedite your processes, and that's
Mhm.
okay.
And you just have to look at how long it takes you to like either make or get the mold, and take the time cost or the money cost if you're just buying the, and then divvy it out up. Like if you, for instance, that scroll work that Jinx was showing you, if you need 50 of those, getting a mold is going to save you so much time just making all those. And it's going to give you consistency too, because they're all going to be exactly the same. And that's the other thing to keep in mind with molds. I every so often I have somebody who goes, "Oh, I really like this horn, but could you make it like just a little bit longer?" And I'm like, "No. What you see is what you get. It is identical every single time. Like this is what you get. So if you want identicalness, molding is a fantastic option for that. Don't ask somebody to change their molded piece without understanding that then they need to make a new mold. So
I forgot I had this. I'm sorry, I had to show you guys. So I was talking about how I've had my head cast. Yeah.
Mhm.
I was there you go, right there.
Yep.
Uh that is squishy Sam head
Yep.
right there. And it was so we had to do it in two parts. Most of the time people will do when you're doing like a head cast or creating a mold for like an actual replica of yourself, most of the time you'll do the full head in a rubberized life cast. Like it'll be some kind of a rubber, or it'll be some kind of
Mhm.
just squishy rubbery
Silicone,
like silicone, or there's also another one that I'm forgetting right now. But
alginate.
we did not know, thank you, alginate. I was using alginate. We didn't know that when I cover my nose, I had an anxiety attack so severe that we had to rip everything off of my face because I literally went from anxiety attack to panic attack. I'd
Yeah.
never had my nose and everything else covered. Something about having it all covered, I freaked out. So we were
I
able to
would
do
not
it again, but what we did is I had the one of this squad help me. We just completely uncovered my nose because it's really easy to just build that little shape with some rubber afterwards, and I wasn't
Mhm.
too concerned about that having perfect shape because I was going to sculpt over it anyway, so I'm
Yeah, I
like
was
it
gonna say
doesn't
you
need to
didn't
be
even need it
perfect.
for your mask, so
No.
like
So
mhm,
I was like, so we opened it like this, and then everything else was covered, and just having nothing around here
mhm,
helped. But we had to keep going like this and wiping, and eventually I think we put like Vaseline or something so that made it easier to keep it from
mhm.
actually sticking to my skin.
you
But
know.
be aware that if you are doing a life cast and you've never done it before, try it and just half your head first to see how you feel, because apparently I generate a lot of heat from my
Yeah.
head. And so I was
I
basically
couldn't do it.
overheating and
Yeah.
panicking.
See, I
I
wouldn't
don't like
recommend
moments and stuff.
if you've never done life casting, don't just try it. Get somebody who has done it
Oh
before.
yeah, get people that have done
So
it. Yeah.
yeah, it's so easy to accidentally suffocate or accidentally hurt somebody or accidentally burn somebody. Because with
Mhm.
alginate, a lot of the times you do plaster bandages on top. And if your alginate's not thick enough, or if you're laying too many plaster, because plaster gets warm when it
Yep.
cures,
To be
you can
safe, what
burn
we did is we actually put a swim cap on me
somebody.
to help protect my ears and my skin.
Yeah.
But we did, I think, 3 layers of alginate. And that's another thing too. You're going to be doing this for about 3 or 4 hours
Yeah.
before you're done.
Yeah.
Like it
It's
all
not a
sets
quick
really
thing.
fast. I mean, overall, like the alginate takes a little while, but the plaster or like the plaster bandages, they set really fast. You don't
Mhm.
have a lot of work time with them. but
Yeah.
they generate a lot of heat. And so by the time I had my full head covered and I had all that heat, I had to have my nose open, or it was the only way I could tolerate it.
Yeah. So if you go to Reynolds, your local Reynolds, most of the time your local Reynolds will have a list of artists in your area who will do a life cast for you. So you
Nice.
can go to Reynolds and be like, hey, do you know any local makers who will do a life cast? And they oftentimes have those resources. The other way to do it is actually to go to your local theater and ask your local theater if they have a makeup, or your haunt house. Sometimes haunt houses make their own prosthetics. Only like the bigger ones though make their own prosthetics. Most haunt houses like just buy them en masse. But those would be the resources to kind of reach out. Or if you know someone who is doing it full time, you can reach out to them and see if they do it. I don't do life casting, but I could like boot you to somebody else who I know does life casting. So
Here about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
Well, I was just going to mention, because Reynolds here in Phoenix, so they actually have, their locations are Allentown, Atlanta, Charlotte, Chicago, Dallas, Denver, Detroit, Edmonton. So they're in Canada as well, Los Angeles, Orlando, and Seattle. And they actually have coming up webinar, or no, this is in person, Basics of Mold Making and Casting seminar on August 23rd. So there's one coming up. Actually, I might want to try and check it out.
And the
$75 class.
People here in Phoenix are just, they're amazing. They're amazing.
And they have another one.
Laura and Garrett. Actually, one of the people who teaches the classes is Garrett, who, for those who have been in the Phoenix cosplay scene for a long time, would recognize from the 4 Horsemen of cosplay. He's an amazing maker. He really knows his stuff. So like, we are really lucky here in Phoenix as cosplayers to be able to go in and have like a cosplay resource. Because a lot of like the Reynolds stuff is made for like specific commercial productions or commercial uses. So sometimes the way they tell you to use them is not the way cosplayers end up using them. It's a running joke in Reynolds that I go in and I'm like, okay, what is this supposed to be used for? I'm going to do this with it instead.
This is the one of this what I was mentioning. We had a bunch of people I wanted to share. This is what it looks like. So this is how covered you are.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why a lot of people have a hard time. And then on top of all that, you're going to get plaster casts too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at his face like, oh my God. Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. And you're eventually sealed up. There's like usually they use tinfoil, but you can use Vaseline. You can use all kinds of things to make sure it's easy to break you out. And then we had jokes. We didn't actually do that, but anyway,
yeah, that's funny. Not how you do it.
Yeah, that's not how you do it. You put the tinfoil. You put the tinfoil there so you can just pry it apart. And then what you do is you have surgical scissors only. We had surgical shears. Do not use anything other than surgical shears. Yeah. And you just,
for those who don't know, surgical shears have like a protective bump on the bottom so that you literally can't get skin in it because it pushes the skin out of the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's also recommended if you're making patterns, like any kind of pattern with like duct tape or anything. There you go. Yeah.
Yep.
So if anyone remembers Heroes of Cosplay, they actually did this in like the first or second episode, or maybe it was Jessica and who's her other? God, I cannot remember the two of them. But the two of them that did the D&D group, they actually casted one of their heads, and you could see them like they had a whole like panic attack thing. So just be prepared. When I was watching it, I was having like high anxiety. I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it's on like the I think second episode.
Here's the thing. Like, let me grab my friend over here.
That's if you want to have like a mold of your own head to do all sorts of weird and fun things.
Yeah. If it's not super tight to you, they sell dudes and girls already. Like if you're just doing, I just need something to go over my nose, unless it needs to be specifically fitted to your specific nose, just use a dude. Like
I actually have one for myself that's a female, and it was meant for wig styling, and I just shaved all her hair off. Because her head's almost like she's got the little tubby cheeks. And I'm like, perfect. That's like, and then whatever doesn't fit, you put it on you, and you can go in there and you can build up with a little bit of the Quick Cure new 2-part epoxy silicone that's temporary. You can build in there, and you can permanently seal it into sections so that it lines up perfectly now.
Yeah. So a lot of people are like, I need a life cast for like a brow piece or something like that. I'm like, why? Like,
I have a solution. Hang on. Narrative Cosmetics, my friend.
an unusual brow. But usually, yeah, they're right. Like anything in general, some basic masks like superhero masks that, unless you wanted to mold your face as something different, but in general, you can just put it over. I think when I made like Ryan's mask, I used boar blood. Don't do this. We put on.
So actually,
And I was like,
if you want to do a quick, like, quote unquote, make your own prosthetic, so Narrative Cosmetics is now selling what is still used in special effects art today in movies, right? So they have their own scar wax, but my favorite is their silicone modeling compound. It sets it, you've got about a 5 to 10 minute working time. It's just 2 parts. You put it on a little mixing palette, you mix it, and then you self apply, and it self adheres. Like, I actually haven't had to use any adhesive for this stuff, and it works so well. You can do so many things with it. It's, I believe, platinum cure or tin cure, so it's very few people have had any reactions to it, and there's just so many applications for it.
Cool. Those are actual molds that they put it in. I saw.
Yeah, you can actually. Oh, sorry, I accidentally hit the wrong button. Let me go back. Oops.
You lost more in there.
I did. I told you I needed to not fuss with my hair, and I fussed with my hair, and I knocked it off. So, like, it's my own doing.
Yeah, so you can even put this in a mold, let it cure in about 5 minutes, peel it off, and then you have, a mold like this that
a reusable prosthetic.
Yeah, and it's really, really useful. They also sell prosthetics. So if you are scared to make your own, you can buy prosthetics from places as well. But we recommend playing around with molds and creating. You can even create a mold out of this modeling compound. Like what I've done before is I've put enough of the compound to shape the shape of my nose, let it cure, peeled it off, and then I could put in there whatever I want.
So just for our US people, Spirit Halloween is already open. Did y'all know that? I walked into one. So they do have a lot of like prosthetics, like very simple, basic, they're not very long time use, but those are quick ones. Maybe you can use that to learn to make your own. So that's a really good option too.
Yeah, you could use it as because a lot of them are like this stiffer latex. So you could create a mold and use it as a test to get familiar with something that's a little bit more flexible. A lot of the times you're going to want to start with molds where it's going to be a hard item that you're casting. The more you get into flexible items, the more difficult it gets to ensure that you're not having any, I think it's called delamination. So then you just have to learn the types of products that work well with one another.
The other big thing is bubbles. If you don't know how to pour, or if you're not practiced in pouring, because like silicone is a liquid, and like say I have like the horn. Well, here I've got one. I've got the horn that I'm trying to cast. You don't pour it directly on here. You pour it here and tilt so that it like goes around your horn.
Yeah, I call it rotocasting, where I think you call it slush casting, but I think it's pretty much the same thing.
Casting or rotocasting.
Yeah, you're just essentially kind of moving it around. You never just hold it in one spot while you're pouring. You always kind of move it around so that it's getting the gases out, and then also really filling in those details.
At an angle, and then you do the whole thing.
Yep. And you can actually rotocast stuff to get a hollow item. All of the horns that I make, I do rotocasting so that way they're hollow and they're lightweight. So that's one of the benefits. This is what kind of one of my, I'm not gonna say pet peeves, but one of the things I talk a lot about is that there is such a prevalence of 3D printed horns nowadays, and they're great. That is a fantastic thing. I'm not bad talking them or anything like that. But the thing to keep in mind is unless your 3D printer is good and your 3D print maker, the person who's doing it, pays attention, a lot of those 3D prints become really solid or really thick, and they become really heavy. Whereas if you get a rotocast resin, a lot of the times they're a lot lighter. So yes, I know, for example, my horns are usually twice the price of 3D print horns, but that's because I guarantee these are so lightweight that you could even a horn this size, you could hold it on.
Well, and I will say that the resin horns are more durable. 3D print over time, depending on exposure to heat or even just stress, they tend to crack faster. They have
because they're just layers on top of each other. Resin,
yeah, they tend to like
is
snap.
a single piece, like
yeah, unless of course you're actually casting a UV resin. Because I know a lot of people now are dipping their 3D prints in UV resin and then flash casting or a flash sealing or curing. There you go, that's the word, flash curing, so that they have more durability. But you can potentially lose some detail, which is why you have to be very careful. You can also brush on UV resin, and that will help smooth it out. But it's just you can't just buy a 3D printed item unless you've had it a really long print time and expect it to be without striations. You're always going to have to work to it.
Like resin printers use UV resin, so yeah, those are going to be, you know, a lot more durable. And also, if you've ever heard of that quick UV glue, it's UV resin. So I actually use UV resin for a lot of like repairs, any kind of like changes that you want to make to props or other things that you've used resin on. I sometimes will use both, like the 2-part resin once I have something casted and cured, and maybe I'll use the UV resin for like a coat or like to add something else to it. Because you can put like a droplet and then like cure it and it'll stay. At least here in Arizona, again, because we are very dry and very hot. In colder, wetter, you know, climates, I don't know if it would cure as fast, but those are some fun things that you can do to manipulate UV resin.
I was just talking with Alan about this because so Alan Amos Creations used to be a Phoenix-based prop maker, and now he's in Seattle. And it's so funny because he's like, oh, some of the stuff we use actually takes like a day to cure. And I was like, oh, who knew? Like for us, it takes like 6 hours. Like one of the things we use most is freeform air, which is what this shell is made out of. And it comes as a 2-part putty that you mix together, and it hardens. And on the package, it says can take 24 to 40 hours to cure. Like full cure time is 40 hours. I can't count the number of times I've just put it out in the morning and then picked it up in the evening, and it's hard already.
Like I feel like Arizona is like a enabler for like con crunching. Because I've done it where I painted something, I put it out in the sun, I go do something else, and I can do another coat in like you know, like 30 minutes. Like, but don't do that. The very first time I did that with Warbler was a bad idea. So don't put like Warbler out under the sun to dry. Don't do that.
No, so we're getting near the end here. Go ahead if you have any questions, let us know. But I think we'll start wrapping up, and then we'll just really quick mention what other streams we have this month.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. So I did put a lot of references in the chat. You can always message us on Facebook, Instagram, on our website, which is Cost Talk Live, on Facebook and Instagram, Twitch, YouTube, and then costtalk-live.com. And Amber's done a very lovely
look at the unicorn.
Of a quick set, and those are resin horns, right? And so you mentioned that your prostate at the last minute was not usable, so in a quick pinch you can always use like eyelash glue, and so those are resin pieces just popped on with eyelash
the
glue.
Reason it fell off today is because I wasn't anticipating using eyelash glue, so I have foundation and primer and moisturizer, and I didn't strip it with a little bit of alcohol. So the eyelash glue would have held on if I had taken off my makeup, but you can kind of see like the eyelash glue is like kind of foundation-y. Adhered to my foundation. If I had prostate on, I would have like, it would have like held through because prostate is so good.
The first time I used prostate to put a gem on my forehead, I couldn't get it off. I'm like,
that shit will stay on.
I actually have better luck with silicone glues than I do with prostate. Like prostate works for me, but I have to kind of cabo patch it. Like I really do have to usually mix it with like toilet paper to get it to adhere better to me. But anything silicone, oh god, I have that problem that you had. I cannot get it off. It's like
and this so guys is like I talk about this with body paint too, is that everyone's skin is different, everyone's skin chemistry is different. Things that are going to work really well for me are not going to work as well for somebody else. Something that works really well for somebody else might not work as well for you. It really is like I can sit here and say that prostate is an all day hold, but you might find that it falls off on you. Or if you're like Jess, it might be a multi-day hold. So, you know, it's one of those things where don't do it on the day of con. Do it.
Always
know what you're getting into.
Yeah, and always test a couple days before, because if you have allergic reactions, you're going to need to treat that and have it cure up. So guys, so I'm Jinx Cosplay. You can find me at the Jinx Cosplay on socials and jinxcosplay.com.
And I'm Amber Bright. I am Amber Bright Props on like every social media that's out there. I'm also Amber Bright Props on Etsy too, if you want to check out my offerings or send me any specific messages or anything like that.
And I'm Thermo, and I'll tell you where you can find me eventually. I'm rebranding.
So our next show is actually going to be a craft stream. As I was taking a break, as you can see behind me, I'm still like, this is my new house, my new office. I'm still in the works, but I will be Wednesday night at 6 p.m. PST, MST, daylight, working on some Fallout stuff in preparation for Tucson.
Well, it's 7. It's 7.
Oh, 7. Oh, sorry.
7.
We
7 is the crafting session. Yeah, on the 21st. So Wednesday the 20. It's Wednesday, right? Yeah, Wednesday the 21st at 7 o'clock doing crafting, and then that following Tuesday at 6 p.m. we'll be doing the gaming session.
So just in case you guys, we don't see you again until our next regular stream, in case you don't tune into our evening streams. So Amber Bright and I are going down to Tucson Comic-Con on Labor Day weekend, and Thermo will be at Dragon Con. So we're going to be a little bit mixed up, but come and visit us. Amber and I will be helping out the Fallout, the new Arizona Republic Fallout group. So come see our booth. It's H17 at the Tucson Convention Center. And if you're heading to Dragon Con, keep an eye out for this shiny mop with the sun
just like for the bald head.
Yeah, that's
watch for the glinting.
Yeah. If you see something blinding you from afar, it's probably Thermo.
It's either my skin because I'm that pale, or it's my head.
Yeah, we're plenty of sunscreen. I know it's Atlanta, but still. All right, guys. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you, guys. Amber, Bright, Thermo, and I'm Jinx, and we'll see you later.
Bye.